generational type of a move. And it's weird because it seems that if Trump changes his mind, as there were rumors yesterday that there would be a pause on the tariffs, the S&P spiked. And then, of course, it was just a rumor. So the S&P went down again. So let's take a look at the situation here. This is the balance again. Remember, we talked about this a lot. The balance is a component of GDP, but it's usually a smaller component. It's a very small component of United States total GDP, a couple percent. Okay, but what the Trump team has gone through, and I've organized this by trade balance. This is just a selected group of nations. Okay, and this is in billions. So with China, it was the biggest deficit. China, as Trump likes to say, $300 billion deficit. These are 2024 figures, except for a couple. I will point out what it happens when it's 2023. As we've talked about, the simple thing that they did, which is not a tariff rate, just if you're still not clear, is there's imports and exports, which is a component of GDP, but the component is the net, which is the black. Okay, so, and this is from the United States' perspective. So it is true that the GDP does fall by these amounts. Okay, that is the black numbers. 300 billion. European Union, 236 billion. Okay, 300 billion for China. But again, in the GDP calculation, it's nearly $30 trillion for America. Okay, so you're talking a very, very small percentage. And all that we can, again, this is nobody's profit or loss statement. It's just all that we can say is these countries would rather take dollars than other goods from America. We would rather take their goods and give them our dollars. And that's the privileged position that the United States has been in for the last 80 years. And you can see here that the European Union, if you look at total trade, is bigger than China. All right, because we have $600 billion of imports from the European Union. China, only $440 billion. Nonetheless, to come up with this, and also we got Canada here, which is still quite a bit smaller than the ones, than the top three, but bigger than the few nations ahead of it, Japan, Vietnam, Korea, $400 billion imports. All right. So what the Trump team decided to do using ChatGPT was to just get a list of this stuff, including the Penguin Islands, and find a reciprocal tariff, which they called, and that's this, okay? So this was their reciprocal number, and of course they divided this by 2. All right, so with China, it was negative 67%. Divided by 2, there's your 34% tariff on China, European Union 20%, and on we go. Okay, this was their idea on how to make a reciprocal number. Now, just to remind you, okay, I want to go through a few things here. All right, but just to remind you, this was 2024. The U.S. trade weighted average tariff was around 2.2%. Okay, and our Google, I don't think it's called Gemini anymore, whatever, Google AI says this is expect to increase significantly, potentially reaching 10% or higher, depending on specific goods and countries involved. Actually, that's funny. I just searched earlier, and it's hallucinating. I was getting even higher figures. I mean, this thing could go well higher than 10%. Okay, they're saying that their target is that because again, what is the global trade balance for the United States? It's negative 22%. So it would make sense. They would divide that by 2. They would target the negative 11% or 11% to. Again, it's not even correct math. You would do the full percentage if you thought that this would take away the balance. So this, if you thought that they could just pay to take away the balance, then your tariff would be 67%. But they didn't do that. They just divided it by 2 because it's whatever, 2 sides. It doesn't make any sense. Whatever their little formulas are. It's not the actual tariff rate. Okay, so just understand it's not the actual tariff rate. Then we have these countries here. And I added a couple more, including Ukraine and Belarus, because here's Belarus. It's a 2023 number. All these are 2024 levels except for Ukraine and Belarus. I got the 2023 figures. I couldn't handily find the other ones. But Belarus has a trade balance which rounds to $0 billion. right, a couple hundred million, to the negative 68% divided by the imports. And then from this point on, with Saudi Arabia and then these countries here, it's a positive trade balance. Okay, so it's a trade surplus. So whatever the exports are, which are not shown here, they're higher than the imports, which are green. And look at the interesting spikes here. Hong Kong, Hong Kong, and Ukraine. Both countries which Trump is, penalizing. Now, Russia and Belarus have trade. The United States has a trade deficit with them for the United States perspective. Ukraine, the United States has a trade surplus over 3 times. Okay, over 3 to 1, and it's going to be even more in 2024, I'm sure. The United States exports to Ukraine more than they import. So that's a good thing. From the Trump perspective, that's a good thing. Yet, Trump slapped the 10% tariff on Ukraine, a country that continues to be bombed every night by Iranian drones, and there's North Korean soldiers hanging out in Chinese kit. So it's very odd, again, that he wants to hold his enemies closer. But when you look at Belarus and you look at, where's Russia? Somewhere here. Yeah. 82% Trump reciprocal tariff. It should have been at least 40% based on the Trump math of the tariff to slap on Russia. They decided to put a 0% tariff on Russia and a 0% tariff on Belarus.